We are lawbreakers. One law made, 100 laws made to break it.
Great, thank you for having us. So we've brought together some misfits today. And I want to provide a little bit of an introduction as to why we're here. I think we'll run this conversation for around 30 minutes and also have some time for questions and dialogue. So, please keep any burning questions. We'll definitely have time to get to them. The origins of this project, the Misfit Economy, really started as a way to shine a spotlight on different kinds of entrepreneurship. I think when we hear about entrepreneurs, we often hear about the 20-something-year-old, white male hoodie kind of tech bro. And that's totally fine. There's some amazing innovation there. But the point was really to say, what happens when we think of people in the black market and informal economy as entrepreneurs? How can we think of hackers, of pirates, of Amish camel milk traders as entrepreneurial? And a lot of the people I interviewed, if you ran a successful business in the black market economy, if you ran a drug business, for example, you built a quality product, you grew a brand, you attracted customers. Maybe you were less good at risk management because a lot of people ended up in prison. But you had all the qualities of an entrepreneur. Some of the people that I've met in the black market economy have been the most charismatic leaders that I've seen. And so the question really is, how do we better bring those worlds together between the underground and the Silicon Valley tech hub? And so want to start by just, really introducing our own origin stories here, whether or not we wear the Misfit label. For me personally, part of the reason this topic was interesting is I grew up, both my parents were anthropologists. So my father worked with indigenous people in the Amazon and built some of the first fair trade supply chains. My mom traveled around the world interviewing people who thought they'd been abducted by aliens. And so from that experience, the alien thing, I don't know if anyone believes in aliens, but we could talk about that for a while over drinks. Very terrifying as a child. But the point of that was really to talk to people that make us uncomfortable, to get out of our echo chambers a little bit and be bold in terms of having conversations with people that come from very different walks of life. So I want to turn over, to you guys now, and maybe you can share a little bit about your own origin stories. how, whether or not you wear that misfit label. I know starting out as an accountant, maybe not the most misfit
I
thing.
didn't start as an accountant. I started as something else and ended as one, and I will end as something else.
There we go. Okay. Do you want to start?
Yeah, I mean, I'm Sihle Tshabalala, so I run a company called Quirky Theory. I was born in a township which is just close by here, called Langa. And I started school at the age of 4, finished matric age 16, had nothing to do, no aspirations to go to university. So I started doing off-business robberies to heist jobs. And my luck actually ran out when I was about to turn 19. And I went to prison for 11 years, 30 months. It's been 5 years now since I've been out of prison. And, my life kind of like turned around when I was in prison, because also I discovered that I do possess entrepreneurial abilities or qualities within me, because I started a business in prison. Even though that I was smuggling marijuana, but it was a business because I had 4 prison officials who were on my payroll. For 4 years, awaiting trial, I never ate prison food. I ate all the KFCs and the Nandos. I had everything figured out, from production to supply chain, product and market, and the business was booming. I don't have an MBA or a marketing degree, but I know how to start a business, ghetto hustling.
Great. So that's the business case right there. I remember interviewing someone who famously smuggled 38 tons of marijuana from Colombia to Seattle, and he wound up in prison, and when he got out, he set up a string of rehabilitation clinics around the US and made millions of dollars. So this whole idea that if you have underground hustle and can find a way to pivot it into the mainstream or formal economy, it's an incredible engine.
The best entrepreneurs are sitting in prison, because
Yeah.
I mean, if you are looking to be, if you are looking for the best qualities in terms of entrepreneurship, I mean, these guys possess them natural. 3 that I get to look for. 1, if you want to become a successful entrepreneur, you have to know how to hustle, and in prison, we have the best hustlers. 2, you must have the courage to take risks, and in prison, we have the best risk takers. 3, you must know how to network, and in prison, we have the best networkers. It's just that they choose the wrong product in life, which is crime.
But I mean, if I can touch on that, I often have this exact conversation, and I think it's narrowed down to a singular thing. You said chaps in prison are the best at taking risks because they have nothing to lose, right? They're already in prison. And I think that's where the correlation comes from. If you look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, Africa's sitting, somewhere on the lower side, someone in prisons, all his physical stuff sorted because he's getting fed, etc., but he's got nothing to lose. The chaps in Silicon Valley are getting VC funded, it's someone else's money, and so they too can innovate. And I think if you're at the top of the pyramid, or if you're at the bottom of the pyramid, the amount you have to lose is the same, it's nothing. And that really frees you to hustle, as you call it. And I think that's the interesting concept for me, is everyone in the middle is a little bit scared, and they have a mortgage, and they've got a house to lose, and they've got families and kids, because it's their money on the line, and that's where safe bets are made. And I guess that's where you get incremental increases in entrepreneurs or businesses, and not those moonshots.
Yep. And so your own misfit story starts with a pair of trainers.
A pair of Nikes, yeah. So I grew up in a very poor family. My single mom, she worked 3 jobs to kind of, put food on the table, and I was a little chubbier than I am now when I was a kid. And so I wasn't quite cool. And, I'm ashamed of it now, but you just need that one cool factor. And all my friends had a pair of Nikes, and Nike was going through the crazes back then. And my mom found this guy who could create fake Nikes. They were Cortez in those days. I don't know if anyone knows the Cortez brand. Basically, it was from the streets, US, hip-hop, et cetera, but there was this law around it. If it had 5 ticks across the shoe, tongue, either side of the shoe, back and underneath, it was legit. So I get this pair of Nikes for my birthday, and it has 5 ticks on it. But I don't understand, because I know we cannot afford this pair of Nikes. But my mom, being the open mom she is, she goes, those are fake. The tick on the back and the tick on the right side, that was me. So I thought, okay, this is interesting. And I went to school, and I had a couple of other, poor friends, and I said, don't you want a pair of Nikes? They're selling for 800 Rand in the store. I can get you a pair for 300 Rand. What do you think? And that's where I started, I started hustling at age 11, selling these Nikes. I told them they were knockoffs. Everyone knew they were knockoffs, but no one cared. because the people who were seeing them on the feet didn't care. They thought they were real from a distance. So, yeah, my hustling started back then already.
That's great. And I think the copycat theme is really an essential one to the Misfit Economy. Doing research for the book, I remember learning that the US's own economic miracle, its own story of industrialization, was because you had a lot of entrepreneurs in the US who were commercializing European patents entirely illegally. And so this whole idea of intellectual property protection, I think more and more we're seeing emerging economies that are not seeing that as the sacred cow that a lot of Western countries now hold up.
I think, the whole copycat syndrome, it's just going to get worse because we're running out of unique and creative ideas. The next big businesses are not going to be that one moonshot that no one ever thought about. It's going to be about how do we take three seemingly disparate ideas and combine them into the new creative. And that's where the hustlers and the misfits are going to play, because it's easier to combine three things together when you're not worried about a regulatory framework.
Yeah, yeah. And speaking more about the spirit of hustle that both of you mentioned, I remember an earlier conversation with someone who just spent 20 years in prison, and we were talking about the creativity that you find in the prison system. And so around a room like this, he began to point out different objects that could be turned into weapons. And I was sort of terrified, but at the same time, I thought that was really interesting and creative and showed so much of the mindset at work. I don't want you to name objects in the room that could be weapons, but what do you see in terms of some of the creativity that exists in the prison systems?
Firstly, I just want to see how good is your imagination, your imaginary ability. Let's assume Alexa buys a house. Happy, she has a new home. I come in and break into her house. What does she do? Call the cops and then put on burglar bars. But what she don't know is that she is sending me back to my drawing board to go and figure out how do I break into a house with burglar bars, meaning that I have task number 2. Once I have my task number 2 figured out, I come in and expose her weaknesses. And then guess what? She starts putting on beams, motion sensors, alarm systems. For me, that's task number 3. It's like every preventative system she puts in place stimulates me to think innovatively, creatively, even more. Once I have my task number 3 figured out, I come in and expose her weaknesses. Then guess what? She hires response team. For me, that's task number 4, because I have to figure out how many times does those guys patrol that vicinity. And also, if it happens that an alarm system goes off, what is their response time? So if they take 5 minutes to get to her house, it means I have 4 minutes. That's logic from the ghetto. It's problem solving. Truthfully, it's problem solving. So as I said, the type of mentality that is embedded, especially now in people, in townships and also in people in prison, it's their ability now to think or transcend beyond limitations. No matter how many walls you can build for them, they always build bridges on top of those walls. Because how we are designed to think as human beings, because of our conditions and limitations, we think laterally, like lateral thinking. Whereby those guys, they possess such a very high level of IQ that you can ever comprehend. That's why now you find that in spite of all the circumstances that they find themselves in, especially now being in prison, with all the limited resources, but they always find a way to break through. They always find a way to build objects out of nothing, because that is what they are presented with. So instead of moaning and complaining, they found solutions.
I mean, it's because they had to, right? That's the difference. I mean, from a practical point of view, it's literally food on your table. And I think from a globular sense, business doesn't have that hunger. Certain CEOs don't necessarily have that inherent in them. They obviously possess the skills to build that within them, but they didn't start with it from day 1 or day 2 or your 10th year of life, or literally where you've got to contemplate, do I give this piece of food to my sister or myself because she has sport tomorrow, or she has a big test tomorrow? But the problem is now, how do we translate that? And I guess this is the big question for everyone in the room is, how do we create that in ourselves How do we create that in our businesses? You know, that real, almost ferocious drive and first principle thinking to get right to the root of it. I mean, I love that you say that's just opportunity number 2. All of a sudden, you have to think about what is the next thing that the next barrier I have to overcome, and how do I get to the very core of what it is? It's the same with the weapons. It's first principle thinking. It's can I use that? Yes or no? No. Can I use that? Yes. Let's go.
Yeah, I think.
I think one of the things that tends to kind of like left unattended and it allows us as human beings to divert is that everything it's all about academic experiences or academic value. No one is really putting some sort of value in terms of life experiences. Take for instance, I get to be asked on different platforms both nationally and internationally by different people that Sihle, how do you teach your kids to become good software developers? How do you teach them to a level of employability? Because I mean, you work with kids that have dropped out of school, so they don't have good academic to back them up, and sometimes people tend to forget that, a kid born in a disadvantaged background, logic is developed naturally. Yes, the mathematics and science teaches you about problem solving, which part of logic, because there is a syllabus and a model that you can push in every child's head, but not life. As a child being born, you are not presented with a book by your parents that, okay, here's a book that contains all the challenges that you'll go through in life and solutions towards them. You see them as fit. So kids in the township, the minute that they realize what is happening around them, by the time that they turn 6, 7, and 8, immediately, they switch from living to survival. That's how that mentality is developed. So they switch from living to survival.
I think the other thing you're touching on is actually another pet peeve of mine is education systems. They're based on recall. Whoever's got the best memory wins. I mean, that's ridiculous. We live in a world where I can recall any piece of information within seconds. Ask me any question now, just give me 10 seconds and I'll find the answer. Why must I remember it and then get scored on that and then think of myself as highly intelligent when there is someone in the class who's highly intelligent, who perhaps did not have a square meal this morning and whose brain is not operating at the capacity it should be because of malnourishment, who now thinks of themselves as a failure. There's something broken with that in itself.
I think one of the themes here is really around culture change as well, and the extent to which misfits are these agitators, sometimes quiet and camouflaged agitators of systems, other times more vocal activists or antagonists of systems. And I know both of you guys have experience with this. I've worked with a lot of entrepreneurs that were these kind of quiet and very camouflaged people within organizations that were trying to create culture change. I spoke to King Tone, who was a former Latin king and leader of the almighty Latin King nation, and he was someone who was trying to repurpose criminal organizations. So to say, how do we take this gang and turn it into a social movement like the Black Panthers? How do we use it as a labor incubator for teaching young at-risk youth important skills? And so I know that's so much of what you do, but interestingly, when you were in prison, a lot of the work that you were doing was about finding new methods of rehabilitation, right? So you're actually pushing for culture change while you were in prison. Can you share a little bit more about that, and also some of the challenges or barriers that you faced?
So everything actually started when I was sentenced, because I realized that actually it's going to be long now, that I'll be released in prison. So meaning that now if I continued with my old behavior, it means I'll be in prison for longer. But if I don't, it means that I'll be in prison for less. So I chose the second option instead. And then now I was moved now from Portsmouth to Brandflay Maximum Security Prison, based here in the Western Cape in Worcester area. Now in Brandflay, they had a section there called Afghanistan. It's a war zone, the one of the notorious section. Now South Africa has over 224 prisons. So if you are a troublemaker in all these prisons, they send you to Brandflay. It's kind of like a dumping site for all those bad people that will never get right. So when I left Portsmouth, I left Portsmouth with a bad reputation, corrupting prison officials. So I was placed also in that section of Afghanistan. But as I said that, a couple of months being there, I realized that, these guys, their level of IQ is way beyond, and also the reason why they behave the way that they behave is because now they make other people's perception as the absolute truth. No one has ever challenged their thinking. It's like if you nickname a child or a kid killer, one day that kid would want to live up to that name. So no one has ever challenged their belief system. No one has ever challenged now how they perceive themselves. So a couple of months being there, that's when I was able now to mobilize other, couple of guys that were from part of the community, and then we started a school. So I used to be a maths and English teacher in prison without no teaching qualification for 2 years, because these are the subjects that I excelled in when I was in school. And even the work that I'm currently doing now was inspired by one of my students in prison, because one day when I was teaching class, a student of mine stood up and asked me a question that, Sihle, tell me, what is it that I can study now that will be relevant in 10 years when I'm released out of prison? Now, if you are a fake teacher, that's when you get caught, because now you can't give answers to your students when it's expected to. So, but somehow he sparked curiosity in me. Unfortunately, I could not do anything about it in prison because I didn't have access to computers and internet. So when I was released, that's when now his words came back to me, because I realized that in spite of the fact that I have been absent, in this community for the past 11 years of Langa, nothing much has changed. It's still the same as I have left 11 years ago. That's when I decided not to do something innovative, something audacious, or something that has never been done in Black Townships before. And then I started doing research in terms of skills of the future, and through that I was able now to find out about coding. But for me, I didn't want to wait 3 years for me to obtain a BSc computer science degree so that I can start, making a difference in other people. So I took the easy way out, teach myself how to code. So 6 weeks down the line, when I was able to write few lines of code and then view them on the browser and be fascinated by it, that's when my imagination was captured. So I started now through that now in teaching kids how to code. So all thanks to my mom and dad, because I don't know the kind of aura when they were I don't know the kind of aura they were at when they were making me, but they were blessed with a super baby.
But you said it was the easy way out
Purple
to teach
aura.
yourself. It's not the easy way. It's the hard way, but the clever way.
And I guess similarly on this question of culture change, what interventions are you finding as ways to bring that hustle spirit into the corporation today? Because I think we've seen, there are these trends that, there's a kind of sedentary approach, a stagnation, that folks are getting disrupted. And then from a skills perspective too,
Yeah, I think there's two things to that question. The first thing is the skill set side. I've spoken a little bit about the education system in itself. Our CTO doesn't have a degree, but he's the best coder I've ever met in my life. We have a joke with him. If you say to him, listen, is this possible? He goes, I'll give it to you tomorrow morning. And then it's done. And so that's why I say it's the clever way. Secondly, we find as kind of incumbent companies, when we talk to them across South Africa and a couple, I was in Rwanda recently, in the US, incumbents have this level of arrogance that's quite difficult to disrupt. When the money's flowing in, no one thinks about the future. And that scares me, because the taxi industry thought they were going to be around forever, and there was Uber. And so I think when we have these conversations with companies, and even in our company ourselves, we always try and break it down into a singular team that we can disrupt the culture of. So what's that one team who we can give the mandate to go, you are safe, so we give them that psychological safety, you are safe, and what is that thing you will build now? If you wanted to build a business, if you wanted to pivot out of this, and this is based off incumbent businesses, this is brand new businesses, and we have this conversation with them. I sometimes chat to startups, etc., who go into a whiteboard and we put sticky notes on the board. And I'll literally just throw out a company. I'll say, Spotify is well known for the freemium model. If you had to put the freemium model into your company right now, what it would look like? And we go crazy, we put sticky notes on. The big thing is opening your mind. Number one, it's being scared. You don't know what's coming tomorrow. And then the second thing is opening your mind to possibilities, because if you start with an endless possibility spectrum, you don't confine your thinking. a lot of guys in these companies go, but we can't do this because it doesn't fit with this product. We're a aircon distribution company. What do we know about home automation? You know a lot about automation already because you're doing it in your business. You know a lot about homes. Put the two together and create something new. And that mindset shift is critical. So start small. We call it a skunk works team. For those of you familiar with the term, it's literally a team that sits outside of your business in their own property. That was a tent in the old days. They didn't talk to anyone, and all they did was cool stuff. We like to just say we want to build cool stuff, and that's what we give to the people we talk to. And I think it starts there. Just change 4 people's lives in the team and empower them, but critically give them that psychological safety that, if they fail, they're okay.
And I think just to wrap up, and I think one of the things that we need, to note or even highlight when it comes to culture is never something that is stagnant, something that is, always evolving. And secondly, culture is always created. So culture becomes a system, that is designed by another human being. And the same applies when it comes to prison system. It was designed by human beings. And the only way that you can be able not to penetrate or even bring change into that culture is to have an in-depth experience in terms of the culture itself. For instance, just to give you a quick typical example, because I was part and parcel of the system for 11 years, 3 months, it was easy for me to go back to prison and tell them that, this is what you guys need to do, and this is what is needed in terms of accelerating growth and also ensuring that we reduce the reoffending rate of prisoners in South Africa. Because, recidivism rate in South Africa, it's over 80%. US, 50%, UK, 40%. But in South Africa, it's high. So it was easy for me now to go back because I was part and parcel of that system. I know where are the challenges are because everyone thinks that the only way to eradicate crime is send people to prison because prisons are breeding ground for more criminal activities. But let me tell you something about South Africa. In South African context, the failure or the demise is that, yes, Nelson Mandela was too quick to change prisons to correctional institutions. But the danger, is that now they've never thought about it thoroughly because now he used the same manpower that was driving, the prison mentality or the prison system for the new dawn and expected a different output. And guess what? Disaster. So because I was part and parcel of that system and I realized that actually what people now think that it's happening here, it's not happening. I was able now to go back to them and say that this is what you need to do. So I became the first in the world to teach female offenders to code, the second in the world when it comes to males, because already there's a prison in San Francisco called San Quentin. They run a program called The Last Mile. So they were the first one to teach male offenders to code. But I'm the first in the world to bring internet inside prison because I know the system. So it's easy to change the culture if you know it.
Yeah, if you can bring marijuana smuggling into prisons, you can probably find a way to bring internet into prisons. So I think we're going to pause there and really open up to any questions or comments from the floor. Any thoughts that have been percolating for you guys? Yeah. Well, someone's going to pass you a mic.
Hi, thank you. It's a fascinating discussion. So you were talking about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and I just want to say that at the very top, which is self-actualization, there's certain characteristics. One is that people function independent of a good opinion of others, which I think. The other is that he highlights lateral thinking tremendously and creative thinking. Another one is that the personality is more important than its achievements. So in other words, if you fail in something, the kind of resilient effect is to do with who you are much more than what you do. So I think that I have my own motto, and that is that no is just the beginning of the conversation. And if you just take a look at me, you can see that I'm not really worried about where my next meal is coming from. So I think that those characteristics can be engendered and developed. Maybe some are inherent. Very well. And one of the other things that he said is that conscience is just as important as consequence, even more. So it's not that you don't do it for fear of being caught or that your luck ran out or whatever. It's also to do with your own internalization and perhaps your own level of what is right and what is wrong. So the question is, how do you bring those skills to bear in many other areas of your life? So I think it's passion, I think it's desire, I think it's really wanting to do something that and I can tell you then a number of people here who know me and who know my story, I think a lot of this, where it came from was my absolute desire over a long period of time to have children, which took me a long period of time. And there were doctors who visited that I needed to meet, and I was not going to wait in queues. And I didn't want to approach them publicly, so you had to find other ways. I was fortunate to have a radio show. So I invited the one that helped me onto my radio show without him knowing why he was there in the beginning. And then, found out afterwards. So I think that I don't want to leave with the idea that you have to be disadvantaged or deprived and just have luck run out. I think there are many other ways that we can develop those characteristics and ways that we can teach our kids to develop those kind of characteristics. If you had to speak whether they're actually acting on it really or not to my children, say one thing that your mother taught you, they would say never give up.
Yeah.
And develop an optimistic worldview. So I just wanted to bridge that gap
I love
a little
that,
bit.
and the bringing up of the self-actualization, that's why I speak about the top of the pyramid and the bottom. It's not about being at the bottom and that's the only way you can innovate or be a misfit. You yourself have said, you're top of the pyramid, you're obviously incredibly confident, and you are still a misfit. You still took the creative way of getting what you want. And so what I'm saying is, the real question here, which I really love, is like, how do we instill this in children? So I'm not a father, but my partner has 2 children that I absolutely adore. And this is something I think about all the time. How do you get these children who, as to your point, are top of the pyramid, not worrying about their next meal, to engender those sorts of skills? And I think what you hit on is the self-actualization. How do you grow them as little people or ourselves? How do we get to that point where we know who we are and what we want, and we are aware that we can fail and bounce back? Now, I don't have the answer to that. I'm still trying to figure that out. But if we keep that top of mind, if we can push this into our children, that they are unique. This is one of my other passions. Like, we are sitting in the best times in history. The children you have now are sitting in the best time in history, but also the scariest. So if you can marry that responsibility for our future to the literally living in the best time, and you give them the confidence, that lateral thinking that Maslow spoke about, that safety that Maslow requires at the top, will open them up to a myriad of innovative ideas.
Let's keep going. Let's take 2 questions back to back so we have enough time to move through.
Sorry, I spoke a lot there.
No, yeah.
Lovely question, thank you.
I was just curious if you could give any practical advice how to incorporate misfits into an organization full of sort of non-misfits. I've thought about hiring people from, prison background or whatever, but my main fear is around just how to, make it all work.
Yeah. Yeah, so
Okay.
maybe one,
You want to take 2?
take one more? Okay, well, should we go with that?
Yeah.
Okay, firstly, I wanted just to add on the first question. Kids are greatest mentors. They kind of reflect something that challenges us as parents. They challenge our belief system. They challenge our conditions and limitations. When I was in prison, I realized that in prison you learn a different type of psychology that you can never find in any of the psychology books. You can go to the best universities in the world, whether it's Harvard, it's Cambridge, it's Stanford, it's Harvard, you'll never find it. Because in prison, if I have a problem with you, there's no way that I can take your name and put it to the next transfer list to another prison. No way. I'm not a prison official, I'm a prisoner. So it means that for the next 5 or 10 years that I'll be serving time here with you, I'll still be challenged by you. But the gift in prison, it's never about me trying to change you, it's about me changing me. Let me give you a simple analogy quickly. If you wake up every morning, you go to your bathroom, stand in front of the mirror, who do you see there in the mirror? You see yourself. If there is a boil or a pasty or a scratch somewhere in your face, where do you touch? Do you touch the mirror or you touch you? So meaning that the people that you feel that are challenging you reflects something within you. But what we tend to do as human beings, we tend to give away our own self-power. We give our power away as if other people can be able to press 1 and 2 and 3, and then we jump, whereby it's a matter of a choice. Because in prison, you are provided with ample time to reflect on the life that you were living. Unfortunately for me, prior me going to prison, I escaped death twice. I was shot at, I survived. I was stabbed a few inches to my heart, I survived. Just, last year, July, I was involved in a terrible car accident. So I always believe that my life has always been spared for a greater reason, whereby it's often said that only cats have 9 lives. Maybe I'm one of those black cats because I'm living life number 4 now. Having survived 3 escape death 3 times. So kids are great mentors, and I always believe that what we embed on them as our own limitations and conditions, also they will continue the cycle unless we break free from that. So the responsibility lies with us. Second question in terms of now misfits.
Hiring and
Introducing misfits now in organizations. I always believed that you don't need to hire people coming out of prison that will bring innovative or creative ways. And I think that stimulation has to happen within the organization itself. Firstly, in prison, you learn about management styles and also leadership styles. And the management is always about you guys should be doing that, whereby leadership, we. So I think how we drive our organizations is very much important. And one of the fundamental principles that I always focus on is communication. Because words sometimes have power to break people, and sometimes they have power to build people.
I think there are also like a couple of practical things to your question, I was having a chat to a TV network 3 weeks ago about this very question. I said to the exec team, I said, come to work in a t-shirt. Just come to work in jeans and a t-shirt. Start there. Remember, physical manifestations of innovation, this is what Silicon Valley teaches us. And just that freedom will allow a lot. Honestly, hire a small team, get a small team, or empower certain guys in your team that are slightly left of center already. The guy who wears the cool tie every day that's quite quirky, or the guy with the funny socks. Find those little pockets and really empower them. And don't think you're going to change your corporation overnight, because that's a mistake. You have to start small, because if you don't have that mentality straight off the bat, start with a team of 2, start with a team of 3, but make it well known. So the communication is key. Tell your organization what you're doing and why you're doing it. And say it's an experiment. The truth of the matter is we should all be, as business people, experimenting every day. If you hold that within your corporation and say to them, this is an experiment we're running, you tell me how it went, and have that open dialogue, it's the start. I could talk about this for hours, so
Yeah,
if you
I
want to
mean, I
catch
think
me afterwards somewhere.
the same is true of retaining misfits to organizations can be just as hard as recruitment. Let's get a few more questions on this side.
We have one last
Oh.
question. Somebody's holding the mic
Yeah.
there.
I'm holding it here. This is for Mr. Tshabalala. I see that imprisonment can come in many forms and colors, not necessarily inside a jail. There are kids who are imprisoned inside communities that, like Gaza or something like this. So would you be willing to export your know-how and your experience in going out to these kids and teaching, and the way you have done this to other kids outside of South Africa?
Let's take also the second question.
No, that's the final
I,
one.
th-
Oh,
I
that's
think
the
there
final.
was a limitation. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, quickly we'll do one more. Yeah.
As YPOers, we're sort of taught to express our emotions in certain ways. So I was just wondering how you guys think about being naked with your emotions in the business sense and maybe in other environments.
Great.
Okay. First question, yes, that's one of the things that I've been doing quite a lot for the past 5 years in terms of having to share the experience, to share the knowledge. Because what is currently happening, like for instance, in the United States, all of these prominent figures and celebrities, they were once jailbirds. Anthony Hamilton wrote his first album in prison. you know, and I wanted now to write a different narrative in terms of South African context, you know, that, you know, you don't have to go in prison for you to become somebody. So use our resource book as a caution or life lessons, you know, because I mean, what we lack in these communities is prominent role models. You know, when we ushered the new democratic dispensation in 1994, you know, all of the professors and the doctors, they left the township, you know, coming to stay in the CBD, you know, and also suburb areas. And who are the people that are left behind? You know, drug lords and gangsters and armed robbers. So kids of today envy and aspire and want to be them because that's their own definition of success, you know. So here is now, you know, Sihle runs a technology school that teaches, you know, high school dropouts, unemployed youth, ex-offenders, you know, teenage moms, you know, software programming and graphic design, online digital marketing, and also cloud skills for free, you know. So why is it that now you would resort to crime whereby there's opportunities at a walking distance for you? So I always believed that, you know, in order for us now to bring about change, we need to be realistic in terms of the solutions towards them. You know, so offer something in return. I call that the principle of exchange. You know, if you want to take something away from people, offer them something in return. So definitely sure, I'll be happy to share the knowledge because for me, I always believe that yes, I might be 36 years old, but I possess a wisdom of 60, 70-year-old. So I'm happy to do that. Yeah.
So, Alexa, would
yeah.
you like to give a short wrap up? If you want to
Yeah.
continue the conversation, Alexa has another
have-
session tomorrow
Okay.
in the afternoon at about
Yes.
this time at the rooftop. So you want to quickly wrap?
Yeah, so thank you guys for listening. Thank you guys for contributing your thoughts and insights. I think, yeah, the takeaways for me really are around this idea that culture isn't stagnant, that we've all come into worlds that we haven't created ourselves, that we've inherited from previous generations. And so how can we more proactively create cultures, whether they're cultures of business or cultures of our prison systems or cultures of our education? And so I think Misfits are part of that formula for regenerating our culture in different parts of the world today. So you guys will be around as well
Yes.
a little bit. So if you have further questions, please approach them directly.